Hello again. I think this is part 4. No bloody idea anymore. I'm not counting, but so right, where are we with the micro project? The engine hasn't moved. The Zx9r engine hasn't moved. I have plugged in as much of the loom as I can work out, and I have found online some bypass plugs for kickstand, clutch switch, and some other bits and pieces as well that are not required in the car. And obviously, since there's quite a few Kawasaki based kit cars around, there are plug-in items, bypasses, and short links to get around all the motorcycle specific safety features which aren't needed in the car. So those are available. I'm not buying them just yet because I am currently out of work as of very recently, but I am actively looking at the moment, so I'm doing what I can at the minute that's not costing me any money. So what do we have at the moment? Well, we have an engine bay, sans engine. The engine is down here at the moment. It's sat on a small block of wood underneath it to stop the sump from smacking on the floor. It's been lowered down without taking the drive shafts out, which is a bonus because I don't have a 27mm socket for the hub nuts. I'm sure I did have somewhere, but the only one I've got at the minute is a 30mm impact socket, and that's too big. I think it was 30mm on the original shafts, and these are aftermarket shafts. And these ones have a 27mm nut for God knows what reason. Anyway, so we can see here we've got a manual steering rack. So no power steering, none of that crap in the car, so there's none of that to worry about. There's no air conditioning. There is a heater matrix, which I think I'm going to get rid of and use an electric heater for the windscreen, so those two holes will be bunged. That's the hole for the main wiring loom for the ECU, which I think I'm probably going to use for the wiring off the bike engine. What I've done here, any of the extraneous connectors, instead of tracing them back through here and taking them all out, I've cut them off at the end. They're not needed. They're for engine stuff. That's a positive and negative in there, which I might be able to use to power the other loom, so I'm going to leave that connector on there for the moment. The rest of it is just for lighting. There's no other engine control stuff on there. Again, the fuel pump wiring is completely independent. That's got a separate relay in the cabin with a separate switch and power supply straight from the battery, so that's not an issue. What we have an issue with at the moment, I don't have an engine crane. I had an engine stand and an engine crane and all the bits and pieces, but with military life being what it is, I had to get rid of them the last time I moved. So at the moment, I'm kind of handballing this engine and gearbox out of the car. Best way I can do that, well, the best way I can do that, it's not the best way of doing it. The best way I can do that is to lift the car up onto axle stands, take the jack down, put the jack on that pallet just there, which is a pretty decent sturdy pallet, and with there being no interior and no engine in the car, it's quite light anyway. Jack it up on the pallet, so the jack is on the pallet, lift the car up even more at the front, extend the axle stands, come back down, put another bit of wood on top of the pallet and go again, because the jack just doesn't go high enough to lift the axle stands to their highest point. Once I've got this cross member to about here, so it needs to be about there, I can actually tilt the engine down and bring it under. If I can't do that, what I'll do is I'll remove the alternator in the inlet manifold and it will just slide straight out. You can see the old the CV joint there for the drive shaft. It's not the best way of taking an engine out. Usually you would take the drive shafts out, but I explained that earlier why I haven't. But you can get the engine out by levering the CV joint closed, which will bring the output shaft of the differential out of the gearbox by about that far, which isn't far enough to get it out. So what you then have to do is lower the engine all the way down to the floor with the drive shaft still in it and tilt the gearbox and engine. So if you tilt it down, what it does, it pulls the gearbox this way and gives you just enough room to get the end of the CV joint out. So that's out, that's spot on. Now what I'll do, I will show you the parts of the chassis that I'm not happy with, and that will be strengthened in the next however long it's going to be. That cross member's brand new, by the way. So the parts of the chassis that I'm not happy with, and not 100% happy with anyway. So if you have a look at this side here, so this is perfectly straight, there's no problems with it. That chassis rail is straight. This hump here is for clearance for the pulleys on the side of the engine, and that's a normal micro jobby there, so that's normal. Engine mount, again, perfectly normal. End of the chassis rail, perfectly normal. If we have a look up here, you see this here, that's a crease in the bodywork, this one here. That crease has been caused by this entire side of the chassis being pushed up this way, either by hitting the front wheel into something that's lifted this front end up, or jacking it incorrectly at the front driver's side corner, and it's literally pivoted the front end of the car around this point here and pinched it. That's not a massive issue. There's no structural part going through there. Once you've got the strut brace on there, and obviously once I've got the engine in and the engine's hard mounted, all this area will be triangulated anyway, so that's not an issue. The only thing forward of here is the headlights, because the suspension stops there. What I am going to do though is, if you have a look, the suspension has no forward mounting position from here. There's no bracing at the front of the chassis here. So what I'm going to do, once it's all in and sorted with a drive shaft run through, which will run through here, I will probably bring a bar from that mounting bolt there out under the drive shaft, and then up to either this corner here, or triangulate it under the chassis under this point here, which is a big hole in the chassis, which gives you access through to the main rail. So from there to there, to triangulate this point, just to give the suspension a bit more rigidity. So the parts I'm not happy with are on this side. Now, if you have a look here, this engine mount, okay? Now this engine mount is like that. It should be like that, which isn't a massive deal, but when it's both sides are twisted round and they're actually cocked over this way, when you put the gearbox mount in, the gearbox mount is stretched all the way over to the front here, and there's no movement in it. So when I had it working before and the engine was running, the gearbox mount would actually rub on this side of the engine mount, or the gearbox mount, the chassis mount, whatever you want to call it. That's not a major issue, because again, with a motorbike engine going in there, this is probably going to get removed, ground out, and a new mount put in. So if you have a look, we're looking at creases in the chassis. That hole there should be round. So you can see there's a crease here, there's a crease there, and more worryingly, there's a huge crease across there. Again, these are evidence of a massive whack on this side, and there's a bigger crease just there, and another one there. Now that hole should be round, and it quite clearly isn't. And if we follow it back, this point here with the brake pipe going through it should be that way further as well. So this whole section here has twisted and crumpled. It's not overly crumpled, and further forward from that, there's no evidence of crash damage or anything on the front of the chassis. Again, what I believe is either it's been jacked up in the wrong place, it's been dropped from a great height on the front end, and both front turrets have gone and then come back down again, or it's been twisted at the front end, and it's been then twisted back again, and these creases are what's left of the original accident damage. The other area of concern is this bit here, where there's a tiny little split and a hole at the bottom of that corner, which again can be sorted out with a just put a triangle plate in there and weld it in. So that's it's not going to stop the car being built. It's what's the word I'm looking for? It's non-structurally critical, and it's also not suspension geometry critical either, because the suspension pickup points are in exactly the same place. So the next thing I'm going to be doing, once the car is up in the air and I get the engine out, this CGA3 here, which is for sale, by the way. It's 38,000 miles, CG 13 cylinder head, CGA3, 1.4 bottom end, with a plug in where the distributor should go on a CG13. And it runs perfectly. ECU, key, chip, immobilizer, fob, and everything like that can come with it. Anyway, once this is out, I will lower the car back down again so it's in its normal position on its wheels, and then what I will do is bring the motorbike engine and gearbox over, stand it on the pallet inside the engine bay with a jack underneath it, and then jack it up to roughly where I believe it's going to be. I can make up some mounts, temporary mounts, to hold it in place whilst I wait until I get a job, obviously, and I'm able to afford the chain diff and drive shafts. I don't think I'm going to be able to use these drive shafts. Now, the reason for this is the kit car micra is about 4 or 5 inches wider than a standard car. And as I said in the first video, I don't think that putting spacers on is the correct course of action because of the steering geometry. So what happens on a kit car is the bottom arms get extended, or they actually build better bottom arms. These bottom arms here are brand spanking new. They've never been driven on. They're brand new. They've got poly bushes everywhere. And they've actually got polybush anti-roll bar mounts, but I've not fitted an anti-roll bar to the front of this yet. We'll see whether or not I need one. With it being lighter at the front end and front wheel drive, it may not need a front anti-roll bar. So once the suspension arms are made wider, the drive shafts themselves will be pulled further apart, which means these shafts are not going to be any good unless the output CVs from the chain diff are much wider. If I can't get them wider and adapt the CV joints, the next course of action would be to go for something like a Nissan Primera drive shafts, which are well, the shafts themselves, not the CV joints, but the outer shafts, outer CV, sorry, with Primera longer shafts, and then inner CVs from whatever the diff comes out of. So if you've got a differential from a Subaru, it'd be Subaru inner CVs, or a Ford or a Mazda or whatever it is, you'd use those inner CV joints and adapt the drive shaft to that. Failing that, I'll have to get some made, and again, that's something for the future. That's not something that's going to happen anytime soon. I think my next update will probably be the car in the air with the engine out, and the motorbike engine struggles to try and get it in underneath the car. I did have a bit of a what's the word I'm looking for? Dramatic moment earlier on. I don't know if you can see, the car is quite close to this side of the garage. What happened? The solid beam axle at the back of the car had 2 axle stands on it, and I've jacked the front of the car up, and whilst yanking at the CV joint at the back, I've actually knocked over one of the axle stands at the back, and the car slid over to the left. Now, luckily, I was nowhere near the car at the time. I was out the front, in front of the car, and it slid that way away from me. It didn't hit the floor. It literally tipped the axle stand over, and I was luckily that it's still got its wheels and tyres on the back, so if it were to completely fall off the axle stands, it would just land on its wheels. So crisis averted. I'm going to find some different axle stands with a wider base, so that they can't fall over, and also look at different positions to put them as well, because at the moment the rear axle, with it being suspended, it tends to move independently of the body, and if I'm shoving the body about, the axle will put undue stress and undue movement onto the axle stands and potentially cause me an issue again. So that's where I am. I think that'll do it for tonight. I've got loads of shit I need to get rid of. All of that stuff there is going. There's a brand new catalytic converter, and the exhaust manifold sold, by the way. This one here, so that's no longer for sale. That is getting put. If the guy who's bought it's looking at this video, it is going in the post soon. Obviously, with coronavirus, I can't currently get to the post office, and they're not accepting parcels that are non. What's what I'm looking for? It's not, if it's not for key workers, they won't accept the postage. So thank you very much for purchasing them. They will get in the post as soon as I possibly can do. At the moment, that's not currently possible. So I'll see if I can get like an online courier to pick it up or something. But again, it's not looking hopeful. And I think that's it. There's the Honda Civic aluminium radiator that's come out of it. I'll probably use that again for the bike. I'm not sure if the water pump on that is going to be big enough to pump water around that huge radiator, but again, you can never be, well, I'm going to say you never be too cool. If you're racing the thing, you can never be too cool. So I'll fit that back in, and then we'll go from there. So thank you very much. I'll speak to you next time. Let me Kevlar bumper there. Thank you.